Today, we are 12,000 Nunavimmiut living in a homeland that's rapidly changing. To prepare for a better future, let's look at some important events in our past. When the young Inuit leaders negotiated the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement more than 40 years ago, they wanted Inuit self-government to be part of the deal.
But right away, government negotiators ridiculed their proposal, like lecturing to young children.
Government emailing about Canada me. Canada government avit to simarut provinces, territorial government, Nunalilyo government. Takutwago bo Canada me man. Nunahakasimari government nani tayaw mario hangilak.
It was true. Indigenous people had no say in governing Canada.
This is a story of how Inuit led the charge to make Aboriginal people partners in ruling the new Canadian Constitution.
To give solemn proclamation to our new Constitution.
In 1979, when Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau declared that Canada needed its own new constitution, Inuit leaders got involved. They wanted to make sure Aboriginal people would not be left on the outside.
The Constitution is now home.
Dakkunga ikitsautiguma lilauksimanang mili Inuit ikikatigilugit pigunnaw titaksima titausimangima tataan Canada sorlo tillitautuinna tuiaksunin tiguyautuinna suni taimeisimamman kanu atanniutaumi makattiluta inutuinnaujukun uppalo allailuni atanniutaumi makattilugin taan sivullipaugajarninga isumasimamma tamaunga Canada mo tullireaqqaaloqtinago Immakataanna angekhatigin aqqekhateqaqsimagutta Prime Minister khutigiyattining ammalutamakkuwa Premier sunguyuillo tamanna sulillaqattuujoq taimailinguyamin isumanaloqsimajoq ilaujoqaqtuhangituarami pillariuju pinasuartaulertuutillugo isumagiyaut angimmaluunni ilaungituarami nuitangituarami.
The signs were not good. 10 years earlier, Prime Minister Trudeau had proposed to extinguish all Aboriginal rights and assimilate Aboriginal people into the white Canadian mainstream.
C'est extrêmement compliqué. Il faut faire comprendre aux Canadiens et singulièrement aux Indiens eux-mêmes qu'il faut un choix. Ou bien on entre dans la société canadienne de plein pied, on est égal devant la loi, on a les mêmes droits que les autres Canadiens. Mais alors on risque de perdre certaines de ses valeurs et certains de ses privilèges.
It was a fiasco. Indigenous people in every corner of the country were outraged. Prime Minister Trudeau backed down, but it was clear that Indigenous people had to be vigilant now, as they sought a place in the new Canadian Constitution. To prepare their offensive, leaders from across Inuit Nunangat formed a task force.
Taitsumani Inuit tapirisakut katinga makanahaktiluit itlulimi. Uhausa halauqsimagatta tamanna pehojakjualeriner pimmarialuninga pitsutigitsugu taanna timiuyung ITC kunu pitutsimaniaraluarlune namminer aulagunnabehaklune.
For a start, they began to educate Inuit about what was at stake.
Then England mo kaustitaw mo lang mamana.
Pihujaktua leritsuta taitsumani 1982 mi katutsilauksimajugu inutsuta kanatamiu inulimaangi katutsilauksimammata Nunavimmiut ilautilugin. Inu hatigigaluaqsuta atsigillutuaipimisumakaqattasimatsangimmigata.
The differences were important. Nunavik had the James Bay Agreement, which defined important rights. The other Inuit regions were still negotiating their claim with Ottawa.
Ilauvittarigajartauttinik Inuit-iltariau nerigiartanganik aaqhigasutimalertugu kisianikavamakkut kiullutulaawatangitussulli
Kavamai iluani aulatauyut angikatigigaswarniulaarniatu tikitaugaswartilugu atsigingitupalo hattasimammata suurlu kamagiyaugiali.
Pierre Trudeau's first step was to create our famous Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And the people of Canada decide if they want a charter.
The Inuit got involved for one big reason.
We were concerned that the Prime Minister's focus on a Charter of Rights and Freedoms empowered individuals in ways that could negatively affect the collective rights of Aboriginal people.
The old British Constitution held up individual rights over collective rights of communities. The result was that marginalized minorities got left out. There were public hearings around the country.
All of the representations were on substance, and they were made by women's groups, by Aboriginal groups, by Japanese Canadian groups, by gay rights groups, by all sorts of groups.
Canadians came through with a clear voice. It was time for greater diversity.
We better grab this signature, this paper, and run before anybody changes his mind.
The Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the first part of Canada's new Constitution. It sets out the pillars of Canada's democracy. Now, with the Charter agreed, the rest of the document would have to consider all Canadians, including those who were here first.
It became apparent that the Constitution had to contemplate a place for Aboriginal people in modern society. And so one of the elements of the discussion was, what are Aboriginal people's rights? Where do they fit in this nation state?
The charter debate had been a warm-up for the Inuit. The real battle was around the corner.
The Charter was a promising first step, but Inuit wanted self-determination, which meant that Aboriginal rights should be spelled out. How to get there?
The first step was to go to the government, the federal government, and say, we hear you're going to have First Ministers' conferences. Well, we want to participate. And I remember the government's reaction at the time was, well, you don't understand. This is a First Ministers' conference. You are not First Ministers. So, this isn't for you.
That was the same language, word by word, that the Inuit had heard when negotiating the JBNQA. But this time, one Inuk did have a seat at the table.
Uwangale katimawingulaqsimagama 1979 utillugu Tagoona House of Commons katima victuarmut nunatsiaq kigartorlugu tamanna pequyaqtuaq pigialerma lila tusaqsaawalleelerma tamanna pillerearia kautigilaorsimayavut katimayinngortillunga tagvane Canada katimavialo viluane.
To make headway in negotiations, the House of Commons and the Senate set up a joint committee, and that's where the Inuit delegation first appeared, live on national television.
From the Inuit Committee on National Issues to be here tonight and present their brief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to introduce the young lady on my left, Mary Simon. She's also the member of Inuit Committee on the National Issue. On my left, we got Mark R. Gordon. He's also the member of Inuit Committee on the National Issues. Eric Tagoona to read the brief.
Our leaders were the only Indigenous people in the talks. They wanted to make a point about language and culture.
Ammalo dakwatusamata damani tuyut. Wakain nagabit sumun inut suta.
It was the first time 99% of Canadians had heard Inuktitut spoken.
The interpreter apologizes. Unfortunately, she does not know the language of the Inuit people.
A solution to that problem was right there in the room.
His name is Deputy Nungak, and I'll have him just to respond to Willie Adams' questions.
Very briefly, to answer Senator Adams' question. Taitsumali sibuli pa mikati manok dawa tidu bikhwak dawa laganong tapika ni pa na kutsitumit suta tusaji angomat sisutik kalunadi tu uiwi titulu tusaji ubi pingarugi yolok simarugu ay monuki kwagolok tulo.
Next, our leaders went to the heart of the matter.
The Government of Canada commit itself to negotiate a framework of constitutional rights and protections for Aboriginal peoples.
It is a gross injustice which should be corrected and which should be recognized in the very near future by people who are empowered to correct these kind of injustices.
They were angry at not being taken seriously at the top, where the real power was.
This is why, for a number of times, I myself have requested to meet with Trudeau, and I have tried every avenue as much as possible to get to him. For some reason, I'm blocked. Why, I don't know.
By now, the Prime Minister had learned the lesson from 10 years earlier. For one thing, he had traveled to the north and listened to Aboriginal people. But suddenly there was opposition from another quarter.
We certainly in Alberta do not accept the fact that there should be anything other in our Constitution than two sovereign governments, the federal and the provincial level of government.
The Premier is saying it's, if you put this in, that's it, all the cities will be claimed by Aboriginal peoples. They'll take over the governments. They'll use this. They'll be in the courts all the time. The country will come to gridlock in terms of functionality.
With 9 premiers raising their voices, the Prime Minister waffled. Our leaders had to up their game.
The lands that were given to Native people in the treaties will be protected. It will not be taken away from us when we don't want it to be taken away from us. The land that we will get.
All Aboriginal Canadians wanted a say in the new Constitution, but First Nations leaders appealed to England because the original treaties had been signed with the King 200 years ago. Only when the High Court in Britain ruled against their claim did the First Nations join the Inuit at the table in Ottawa.
As months passed, tension rose at the Joint Committee. Our impatience was growing.
If the Aboriginal rights are at the sole discretion of the federal and provincial governments and legislatures, it could be very conceivable that for the development interests in our area, that we could be legislated or our rights could be amended out of existence.
The government and provinces counterattacked. They wanted to put a lid on Aboriginal expectations.
Expressed as to what is the exact meaning of self-determination.
Vast parts of Canada were not, and still are not, ceded by their Aboriginal populations. Provincial premiers were losing sleep over what Aboriginal self-determination could mean.
The showdown came one late night. The scene, a famous Ottawa hotel. On the agenda, Section 34, the brief paragraph that would entrench Aboriginal rights in the Constitution, in principle.
Nui gunnai mataina alla simajutsune angi khatigi utigi simalaktabut resolution mok simalaktu yu pikhoyaktuano kumagniato.
In those negotiations, Indigenous peoples were not allowed in. And there were people at the door, and they'd keep out the Indigenous representatives who were sitting outside or standing outside. And it was a long meeting, went on for many hours. And then each time they would open the doors, they'd say, "Don't worry, your rights are intact. You have nothing to worry about." And the last time the doors opened, I said, "Sorry, we had to give it up."
I just want to reiterate the position mentioned yesterday by our minister that
the provincial premiers had twisted Trudeau's arm, and the Prime Minister had caved. Section 34 was gone.
We were interfering with the rights of the Indian people.
Pitahakunaiman, apirigaktuilok simaya usimaluligo, na sakulang ngitay. Dahil matay may namasangin makilangamanakok sangin makatsungalo. Ipigusutun lutay na Prime Minister namasangin uminik amalo suli yokote haktu sautsunin makatay may tuwiniugame.
It was a night of fury, and it continued the next morning.
Ulla kun katigiak tulilak si Mayaka anak kangani sa 6 tribes ngunakta rin makko ni inon ni ilahaklunga pidritin no amillo amaloya na makwalim dahil itira matay kung anak karayangan ukilak si Mayok kinangalo malun na tulak si Mayok tayo sumani isumalo galatang.
The Inuit of Baker Lake in the Northwest Territories held an unusual protest at dawn today.
Within hours, Inuit in every territory denounced the betrayal.
Inuit nama sangitum makirok si maruguta matuminga sangil taktaw kutingani. Ukakalapi ko na tunga. Nunalin ni 50 ungatanit to ni Canada mi Inuit nunalingin ni Canada sa matinga amuati lak si marabu. Canada nunahak bigiyabut. Uwatini pitsiani aktinya kutay masangil tira hatal ni iltak siyang nakalwamenik sa matinga daw nung amuati lak si marabu.
I recall this morning
the Prime Minister tried to make amends. He gave the Aboriginal delegations 1 week to prove that they had full support from their people.
Ukalak si mang mauap tinu ati kanok ikayok tawi si inup sinu kigak tuiyap sinu ikayok tawi si.
The Inuit team jumped on a plane.
Charlie Watlu, Markar Gordonlu, Eric Tagong Naklu, Wangalu, Tawong Inung Nungaw Katakluta, Kanok, Ikpiyaw ni Ano, Taman na Pikuyak to Iluani Gahang Tinit, Ikpiyaw ni Ano, Pilaga Hakluta, Takpang Inuit Nunangan Nungaw Katalak Simawu.
Take ko makunisanga si Warlo Tatu, take ko kami di liayaw siya mata senators lo amalo may to take ko members of parliament.
Inuit uwap tinutung nganatya laktut tung asukti tawlu ta inungnut taman na ilitariyaw yakaya hangningat ilitaritya kaw tigilak simayangan inungin na kumagamik kablunangin namin.
Type ko government kunit piliringit pekoyak juat pila pekoyak jualeri government kunut time type ko nga kayak talawap ta tilawap ti taman na Aboriginal rights taman ko Inuit ilitarayaw ya kang mata taman na tigwa piyaya kang makikap ti taman na.
Programs normally seen at this time have been cancelled or rescheduled so that we may present the following CBC News special.
The constitutional talks were high drama. Rogers, CBC and Radio Canada joined in. The broadcast pulled in big numbers. People who had never met an Aboriginal person in their lives.
Tana kingo muta kutsu iltak simawattaka teikwa Canada limami talabis kutaw tuktaw wala muta katimanok diwat ay bigi simarabut tamakkuninga ukakataktat ni ukabigi kattatabut. Government tiliyaw marunong wakta marulutay kan itchiba hatigiyabot angin ngusung ito araw wakta dugit awak ko inyuhutingit Canada miutuin niya halunatuin niya tukisi valle tukisi mitchiago loktu vinyus rasugiyakka yugiyakka.
I don't think we have much time left. I'd just like to give ICNI's position on this clause.
I went down to visit my grandmother, and she was well in her 80s at that time, and she said she was so moved by the eloquence of Aboriginal leaders, and she'd never known any, she'd never heard any articulate their views, and she went on at some length to describe how moving it was to hear a real Aboriginal voice on these issues.
The discrimination they suffered was forced upon us through a system imposed by a white colonial government, through the Indian Act.
It was a strong signal to the country that it had changed. The minute they let Aboriginal people, Indigenous representatives sit at that table, they were acknowledging, de facto recognition, that there was another level of government, that there was another aspect of Canada that was there. And that was a key turning point in the whole constitutional thing.
Larry, I'm with Saul Sanderson of the Assembly of First Nations.
Canadians were glued to their TVs, but in Ottawa, it was no soap opera. Aboriginal people everywhere stood behind their delegations. Inuit, Métis, First Nations. The premiers were digging in their heels. The Prime Minister felt stuck. It was time for his point man to swing into action.
Mr. Chrétien established very good relations with his provincial counterparts over the summer of 1980. And that was really important because personal relationships matter when you get involved in a difficult negotiation.
The premiers were opposed to Section 34, which recognized the Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. Jean Chrétien took the premiers to task.
He also, from 1968 till 1974, had been Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development and had established very good relationships with First Nations. He was able to tell the provincial premiers that as far as he was concerned, the federal government was concerned, there would be no agreement without Aboriginal rights. And if there was no agreement, the federal government was prepared to go to the people of Canada on a referendum. And no provincial premier wanted to argue against the protection of rights and freedoms.
Spring was on its way in Ottawa. Our leaders had been fighting this battle for nearly 3 years. The Prime Minister was pondering a referendum on the whole Constitution, then a surprise proposal.
It came from the Premier of Alberta, a strong defender of provincial rights. He simply added one word to Section 34. That word was existing, and the crucial sentence became, the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. That became the famous Section 35.
Les trois peuples autochtones distincts, que sont les Indiens, les Inuits et les Métis, ont chacun joué un rôle particulier dans l'histoire du Canada et ils ont droit à une place bien à eux au sein de la société et du régime fédéral canadien.
It meant Aboriginal people would be a part of Canada's governing structure. They would not be a separate nation. But what about the word existing? Were our rights being reduced?
Perhaps it's enough to say that all sides took a chance, because there would be more negotiations later to flesh out the exact meaning of Aboriginal self-government. That allowed Peter Itinnoa to move for the final vote.
Of people generally, whether these proposed amendments you have take away anything from the people of Canada.
Immagerong ublomi mutikitlugo narunang nitiaktok atokattaraptigu suli Section 35. Tagba kanutuinnak Canada lunit, gavamakulunit, makkualunit, uksualuliriyit, kitutuinnak kanuilong nakpatununami tamakkua sivullinitayat okakatigilawlugi kisiani Section 35 tungnavigiyauluni taimannaittariahamat. Section 35 Pigu Yualo.
For us in Nunavik, The Constitutional Compromise once again proved the importance of the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement.
One of the things that was fundamentally important as a stepping stone was the James Bay Agreement. Because without that, there was a precedent for doing something that seemed to work. And so Section 35 was a step beyond the James Bay Agreement. It was a huge step. I don't think Section 35 would have happened without it.
In 1983, there was a change in our ranks.
Charlie Watt, 1983, Senate mo iliyaw kami tikwat out ni Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau mo. Dukumot tisiyo hataw ni nga as itaw ya halongman. John Amawalik ay pataya halongman. Temek tulad hataw na mga maapiriyaw kama ang ilok si magama. Suila John Amawalik mo ay pakaliw ilok si magama 1984 mi katimakdwa ni Inuktitut.
The fact that we have occupied this land from time immemorial is the difference between an Aboriginal person and a non-Aboriginal one.
The 1983 conference confirmed that treaty rights were protected. It also established gender equality, but nothing else was achieved in 3 later conferences. Our leaders took the long view.
Tetchumane Hitongaka Mani Tunutsiani Matailang, Ilnimalo Ilang Tamani Tununi Loximam Malruni, Ilungatusunga, Hot Loximara, Takugili, Prime Minister. Uwago Ibilubangalo, Tamatuminga, Pinsua Swalok Tagalot Nipia Hangitu. Sapilong Yang Tulikisiani, Imaha Irniralo, Irnilu, Tamatuminga.
If we did not succeed at that time, putting that through and convincing the politician at the time, we would not be where we are today in terms of dealing with the self-determination. We are ready to deal with that now, and I have spoken to a lot of politicians, left and right, comes and go, the prime ministers comes and go, but I have also felt strongly as an individual person that I have done planted a lot of seeds within the inside the government, and those seeds are starting to surface now, being agenda of the government of Canada. Even though that we do have our problems, but we are achieving, we are moving ahead. I would say that we got something to be very proud for.
It's been 30 years since the politicians put aside the question of Aboriginal self-government. But now, in Nunavik, the winds of change are blowing, full force. Big questions are on the agenda: self-determination, reconciliation, improving conditions of health, justice, our daily lives. But this we know, it's up to us, standing together to complete what we began when we joined the fight for the new Canadian Constitution.